Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You fit in perfectly to the series and our perfect leadoff hitter because of sort of what you've done and been through. Before we go backwards, can you share with us a little bit about sort of what your daily life and activities revolve around?
Right now?
Yeah.
Or kind of, yeah, I mean, right now.
Going backwards in sort of the whole history. We're going to cover that.
Yeah, it's, I was so regimented for so long that right now I'm not. It's pretty loose. So I like running. I always have. So I do that daily, and I find it really clears my head. So that's part of my regular day, and just kind of, enjoying Southern California. I live in Venice, and, like the ocean. Spend a lot of time in the hills, trail running, and those types of things as well, cycling. So trying to do more of that right now.
So life's pretty good. My sister lives in Venice. I'm up there a lot. Are there any techniques or things that you've learned, and I don't mean just lessons, but about performance, mental health, nutrition aside, we're going to dive into that you wish you knew at 18 or 22 that you know now?
I think, a big one, and I've talked with people about this to some degree, but I think it's really just persistence and just not losing focus. I'm sure things you've all heard before, but I've worked with some very smart people, some incredibly creative people, and just genuinely intelligent people. But I find, all those things help for sure, don't get me wrong, but just showing up and just being persistent and being focused, not getting distracted. And now, started things off, it was pre-social media. So it was easier to stay focused, but I know a lot of people do lose focus. They just get distracted, and there's so many shiny objects out there too. But you can't do everything. So just pick something and go deep. And I think just really dig in. And I think that's one of the bigger things that if I could look back, and I think I did it pretty well, but I think I could have done it even better had I really realized just how scattered people are. And you realize a lot of the time that's why they don't hit their goal, is just lack of focus and lack of persistence, and just even getting bored sometimes. I mean, the whole journey is not all fun and exciting. There are times when it's, not necessarily hard. Hard can be good because you can dig in and it can be fun and rewarding, but kind of boring sometimes, and that's where people drop off sometimes.
Yeah, sort of thinking of some of the people who've been through here, and even what Ben just said about sort of this purpose, it's finding some reward, meaning in the routine. Some of the greatest performers, and they're easy to sort of spot. We had Kobe Bryant here last year, and he loved practice. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, I just love the process. I love the process of the grind. And so falling in love with the process can sort of give you that purpose that keeps you going. When, it's not all fun, particularly, starting a business. So enjoying the process is sort of a mature step, a way of approaching it. Tell us about Thrive Magazine, because it's sort of closely, the DNA is very close to this class.
Yeah, well, it was sort of just, I started meeting some very interesting people, and it's actually a different one now. That's an older
That's
one.
old one. Sorry, my bad.
That's okay. Yeah, the website actually of It's Alive magazine is actually not great, but it's a print magazine. It's in about 300,000 stores, mostly the Whole Foods chain and other natural health food stores. And it was really, it just came about because I had gotten to meet some very interesting people, and people who I thought had amazing insight and had done a lot, and just thought it'd be great to have a platform to have them tell their stories and talk about, a lot of what you talk about in this class and your speakers talk about is like what you just said, which I totally agree with, which is, enjoying the process and really making that something that is just part of your daily routine. Although I will say, I think I went too far with just falling in love with the process back in my early days of triathlon, because I was so fixated on how much I could do, like the volume of training, which in the beginning, more is better. When you're training, when you're doing a long event like Ironman, the more you can pack in, the better, if you can recover from it. But then you start thinking about just how much you can do as opposed to how can I get to the finish line in the least amount of time during the race. So you sort of can lose focus on the end goal sometimes, I find, when it's all process-based. So you got to still be able to keep just in check and going back and saying, hey, what is it that I'm actually trying to do here? Like, what do I get up every morning? Sure, I know I swim, bike, and run, and I do all these sets, but how much is that actually taking off my time and race day? And if it's not, is it worth the expenditure of the time and the energy? So you become very stingy with your time and your effort, calories expended, and if you don't get a return on that, why are you spending it? You got to get a return on your training, and then obviously that carries over into business. We can talk about that more later,
Yeah.
but I think that's it's a pretty tight.
There's always
tie-in.
going to be a metric or a way to score your performance, whether it's in business, whether it's a P&L or profit margin or EBITDA, you name it. And in competitive sports, obviously, especially time sports, it's very easy the result is, does this training translate into a better time, into a win, you name it. But the actual score or time can't define you. As Ben said, like if you really put everything of your self-worth on that time and you have a bad time, it doesn't negate what you've done and the effort.
Yeah.
Do you have, so I want to go big before we sort of go backwards. Do you have a philosophy that you sort of live by? Have you sort of crystallized it?
No, not in a few words.
A
I
mantra
think
or anything?
no, just like there are certain things that I think are important. Obviously, I think curiosity too. Just always wondering, just asking yourself the question, why? Like, why is that? And if it is a certain way, why is it that way? And how did we get there? And I asked this. This is a rabbit hole. We don't have to go all the way down here, but just even about eating meat. I've eaten plant-based, completely vegan now for 27 years, and it was just me asking that question. Why are we eating meat? Why are we doing this? And just that question. That's just one example. But when you just find there's many reasons not to do something, then maybe even though if other people do, it doesn't matter. Like if you can explain it to yourself and justify it, and you're getting good results, then sometimes it all started from that question: is why? Why are we doing this?
I want to do a deep dive on food in a minute. I just want to cover a little bit of background. I mean, truly, just sort of preparing for this and reading about your background and your expertise, I could talk to you for 3 or 4 hours about plant-based food and what we've been sold and what's actually healthy, what's good for the world, all of that stuff. So we'll get there in a few minutes. Childhood, where did you grow up? Any brothers and sisters, and what did your parents do for work?
I grew up in Vancouver, in British Columbia.
Beautiful.
Lived there for about 30 years and been here ever since. But my parents, they're both retired. My mom was a nurse at a hospital in Vancouver, and my dad, he owned a small business, very small business, antique business, where he would refinish antique furniture and sell it in a storefront. So I guess a little bit of entrepreneurship in the family there, but it was a very different time.
Sure. And as a kid, you played sports and you were a runner. At what age did you start running, and sort of how did that sport and sort of that quest to be better at that sport spark an interest in nutrition?
Yeah, well, as many Canadians, I grew up wanting to be in the NHL, and I started late. Most kids start skating around 4 or 5 years old. Now I think it's even younger. But I was around, I think, 13 when I started skating, so I was way behind. So, I just played in a rec league. I was certainly not a great hockey player, and I played a couple years. And I thought, well, maybe I can offset my poor skating ability and poor hockey playing ability with greater fitness. So I started running in the mornings before school, just go out for a jog, and thought, well, maybe I can get really fit and maybe I'll be a better hockey player, but it didn't work. But I got fitter, and I realized I like running a lot, so I became a runner. And started running track in high school, and thought, well, this is amazing. I hope I can make a career out of being a runner. And then
In high school, you already had that thought.
Yeah. I mean, as a 15-year-old, like if you can do what you love, obviously, make a career out of that. That's the goal, right? So I looked into it. I realized being a runner as an occupation is actually very difficult. Doesn't pay that well. unless you're, top tier internationally, and it's very hard. And then I realized, triathlon is probably more realistic. So adding the swimming and the biking, and growing up in middle class suburb and having access to a pool and the ability to get a bike and things like that, that's what puts triathlon, makes it less competitive, really, because other countries, running, I mean, there's no economic barrier there, right? You grow up in Kenya, for example, where some of the best runners in the world come from, and they grew up with nothing. So, being fortunate and growing up in a middle-class area, I thought, well, I can use that to my advantage, and I could maybe be a triathlete. So started training, and did that for a while. I raced professionally, full-time, 7 years, but it was it was not like a lot of professional athletes. It's very lean living. I was, not making much money, just enough to get by, pay to get to races, and that was kind of how that went.
And what did you notice about the difference between great runners, great athletes, and elite? What separated that? Because there's limits to physically what you can do and how much you can train.
Yeah.
What did you notice?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I had looked at that a lot, and one, it's confidence in yourself. It's believing you can do it, like actually believing you can do it, but to a point. And this is where, I thought it was quite interesting. Like some guys would, they'd be training for a marathon, and they would be maybe capable of running a 2-hour and 30-minute marathon, but in their head they would tell themselves they could run a 2-hour and 10-minute marathon. And that would be encouraged. The coach would be just, like shoot for the stars, and like just you can do it, and all this positive reinforcement. Well, I don't think that was actually helpful in many cases, because it got them training at a level that their body just was not capable of. And they would get injured or they get burnt out because they wanted that to be at that elite level without actually being there. And the best intention of the coaches, but a lot of them too, would encourage them. I'll just use an example, like you're great at running hills. You're a great hill runner. You're so good. Just like they would encourage them to help them be confident. When what I believe is the way to do it is actually be quite critical, but have the athlete know that obviously it's in the athlete's best interest. And then if you have the confidence to say, yeah, you know what, I'm not very good at running hills. I don't need someone to tell me I am. That's not going to do me any good. I'm going to go and work on my weakness, and then I will actually be good at it. And I call that justified confidence. You've put in the work to actually be good at something and not just have someone telling you you're good at it. And I've seen many athletes end their careers just because they trained at a level that was beyond them. So be confident, but also be very realistic. Like know your limitations. Sky is not the limit. For many people. And myself, I think, as an athlete, my talent level is very average at best. And what appealed to me about the races I did, Ironman, for example, so for those of you who don't know, it's 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, then a marathon. So a very long event.
26.2 miles.
26.2 miles of running. So it's very long. So the good thing about that is that you don't have to be that talented. You just have to put in the work. Like if you want to be a great sprinter, you got to work hard too, but you have to have some talent. To do these long events, you can offset your average ability just by putting in the time, chipping away, getting up every morning and going through the motions. And that to me was kind of appealing, because I knew that if someone was better than me, someone beat me, that person put in the time too. It wasn't just because he or she was talented and born a better athlete. So that was kind of appealing. But I think just be realistic, not all of us can break through to the next level of that, and I was one of them. I never really reached the top tier. I did okay, was able to do it for a while, but never really broke through.
But what did you notice? And we talk with our partners in the Performance Science Institute. They sort of look at 4 things. They're like eat, hydrate well, move well, think well, sleep well. I think there's 4 things that they focus on. What did you notice about the role of nutrition and its effects on recovery and training?
Yeah, well, honestly, I don't think I would have had a career at all racing professionally if I hadn't really gone deep into nutrition, because like I was saying, the longer an event, the more training you need to do. It's just putting in that time. But training only matters if you're recovering. So recovering, obviously, is when your body rebuilds and regenerates itself. Exercise breaks your body down. It tears muscle tissue. You get weaker after exercise, but your body overcompensates, and then it becomes stronger after. That's why training works, is that overcompensation of our biology. And if we eat well, and I'll define what I mean by well in a minute, but if we eat well, we can speed recovery. So we can do more training in less time, which makes you a better athlete in less time. So it's huge. Like I think that, and at the time too, when I was starting, this was 1990, and there wasn't a ton of information that was readily available back then, of course, but just trying different things, just being curious, open-minded, trying different ways of eating, trying different diets, and seeing what worked, and keep it, training journal and nutrition journal. So, if you had a good performance, you could follow it back and see exactly what you had eaten and what had led to that performance. So then you could replicate it. But it's huge. Yeah, I think that, and the older you get too, and the longer the event, the more it's going to have impact. Like, being young and playing sports, basketball, football, things like that, it's going to help, but it's going to matter even more later in life. Although, I don't know if any of you seen that film Game Changers. It's quite new. It's on Netflix now. But great information, like tons of information there about plant-based athletes, and not just endurance athletes, like strength sports. NFL players, strong men lifting incredible amount of weight, UFC fighters, and so on. So, yeah, once you dial that in, I really think it's a big benefit for sure.
Should we talk Vega first, or food, or the sort of food and plant-based? Let's talk Vega first to talk about the entrepreneurial side. You were the original formulator for Vega 1 for the original product, right?
Right,
Do you have any training in food science?
No, none at all.
The things that you can do when you don't know.
Yeah,
that's another lesson.
It's true.
Who would ever think you could develop an entire line of nutritional products and supplements? Tell us about how that was created, and then just take us through the Vega journey, of growth. When you knew you were on to something, holy cow, this thing could go somewhere. But how did you develop the first product?
Well, it was just, it came back to me with my goal, trying to be a professional athlete, and looking at it and how could I recover more quickly, to your point of recovery and the value of food in recovery. And at that point, I had realized that food played a huge part. So I was making a blender drink every day. And I started eating plant-based. I was trying that. I tried all different types of diets. I tried high carb, low carb, high protein, low protein, a whole spectrum of diets. And some were better than others, but then I was trying plant-based for the first time. And like I said, this is back in about 1990. And I was lacking a few things that I just didn't realize at first. So then when I looked into it, did a bit of research, complete protein, vitamin B12, iron, calcium, omega-3 fats, found plant-based sources for each of those, blended them together, and made this blender drink that tasted terrible. But it was functional, it worked well, I had it every day, and I felt good. My digestion was really good. My sleep became, oddly enough, and if we have time, we can talk about why that was, but my sleep got better. So I would wake up, I would be fresh, I would be rested, I would have slept in a deeper sleep phase. I wouldn't crave caffeine, wouldn't crave sugar, because I treated the cause of the fatigue, not treating the symptom, which, caffeine, sugar, it works. Coffee is a stimulant, gives you energy, no doubt, it works. But it is short term. It is treating a symptom of fatigue. It's not treating the cause. So I started learning all these different things about nutrition and what it could do. I'd made this blender drink. I was drinking it for myself. One day, happened to be listening to the radio, and this guy came on. He was talking about maca, spelled M-A-C-A. It's a root vegetable. Some of you may know about it, but it was very new at the time. So he was talking about his new company. He just started a company, this young guy, and was importing maca into Canada, the first one to ever do that. And he was talking about these symptoms of gaining weight even though you exercise a lot, not sleeping well, craving caffeine and sugar, having food cravings, especially later at night, and described a lot of my symptoms. So I became very interested in learning about this. He was talking about hormonal imbalance and these things. So I thought, this guy's really interesting. So I actually contacted him. I think I phoned the radio station and was like, who is this guy? So he turned out he lived really close by to me in Vancouver. So he invited me over. We met up. He had, like I say, he had just started this company where he was importing maca. And the first day we talked for probably 6 hours. We hit it off. And I was telling him, I was making this blender drink that was helping me speed my recovery, and was really interested in this maca, so he gave me some. I started using it. I put it in a blender drink, and it worked. It really worked well, and I started just improving, and hormonal balance and all these things I think was out because I was overtraining. So my cortisol, the stress hormone, because of overtraining, was too high. The maca helped bring it down, and then my symptoms went away because the problem went away. So I said, hey, I think, I actually can't remember if it was either him or it was me, but we're sitting there and we said, let's do something together. You just started this company, and let's collaborate and make a replica of my blender drink. We'll use the maca. You just started importing. Then he started importing chlorella, which is this, an algae that I found really helpful as well. So we collaborated, and a year later we brought out Vega, and so that was 2004. And then it was just Canadian health food stores. So I went around, gave talks to whoever would show up, very small audiences, and it was just a lot of really gritty brand building. And I wrote a book about my nutritional thoughts as well. It was very short. It was 80 pages, just about my philosophies around nutrition, general philosophy. So I would speak about that, and then how that tied into Vega, and how that embodied my nutritional philosophy. But yeah, it took a while. So
What year did you launch Vega?
So it was 2004.
Okay, and you're going door to door, hand to hand sales. You're doing sales, personal sales.
Yeah. So I never actually tried to sell, and I think that was one of the reasons that it worked. Is I'm not a salesperson, and so it was genuine. I did what I knew. I talked about nutrition. I talked about how it helped me, and I talked about the value of it. And the interesting thing though, so one tub was $75. It had 15 servings. It was gritty. It didn't dissolve. It settled to the bottom. And to feel a benefit, you really had to rebuy it. You really had to have 3 weeks. So it was 2 weeks serving, one tub, $75. So you had to have faith in it. You had to believe it was going to work. And I think just me talking about the philosophy and how I found it to be helpful and why it will work. And then if people tried it, it did work. But that's a hard sell. You think about that now, something that doesn't taste good, that's very expensive, that you're going to have to rebuy to notice a difference. That was tough. It took a while.
Subscription method before you even know if you like it.
Right, and also just to your point too, that was where the ignorance comes in, as being just a beautiful thing, not knowing. If I had actually understood anything about business, and this was my task, I would have been like, this is ridiculous. How is this going to work? But not knowing, and just being, and just to be very honest about it, coming off my Ironman triathlon career, that was, I never really, like I was saying, really broke through and felt a little bit unsatisfied. I just didn't feel as though I really performed as well as I did in training in the races, and just, it was a little disappointing. So that, I think, was kind of a perfect storm, because I could funnel that kind of lack of satisfaction from, where I'd gotten to with it all, into doing something else that was really hard. And in my head, I was still coming into this with that mentality. The harder the training is, the bigger the benefit. So coming into a group at Whole Foods, for example, and talking about my book, and having 12 people show up and 3 people leave after the first 10 minutes, and stuff like that. It was hard, and maybe selling 1 or 2 tubs, but that was almost like a good thing, the way my brain registered it, because it was like, oh, there must be benefit in this. This is really tough. This is really hard. I guess it's working. That was sort of the weird, thing that was in my head. But I think that allowed the beginning, early days to actually work.
The tougher it is, there must be some benefit.
Right.
Great.
Right. It was that, which doesn't really make sense, but it was just coming straight from that that whole triathlon scene. That really was the mentality. Yeah. If it hurts, it must be working. Something's happening that's good. That's where the growth is, right? On the other side of
Exactly.
of what's hard. So I think it was, like I say, kind of a perfect storm there. Not all logical, but it just kind of tied together. And my business partner too. So he was CEO and he managed the day to day. And again, like no experience, just totally self-taught and just jumped right in. And we were very synergistic. We complemented each other very well. So it just kind of.
So initially, just the two of you. Take us sort of how did it grow year over year? And you don't have to share numbers, but just like, did it double the first year? Did it triple? And at what point, what year did you? First of all these stories told in retrospect, you're going to hear a lot of successful people here, and so it's natural, as sort of Ben pointed out, to sort of gloss over. Wow, that sounds so easy. Everybody, finds lightning in a bottle in 3 years. Generally speaking, you don't even know if you have a business for maybe 10 years. 5 years before you even start making any money. There may be some exceptions here, I'm sure, but just like, at what point did you sort of know this thing is sort of taking off in a really significant way? Did you raise money?
No, we didn't. So yeah, good question there too. And so we bootstrapped it. I didn't have any money. So my partner, he had just, he actually worked in a box factory before that. So he was making boxes, cardboard boxes, and he noticed, and he is a born entrepreneur. I'm not. I like, and we can talk about this more later, but I like to use entrepreneurship, capitalism, to sort of nudge the world in the direction I would like it to go, and we can talk about that, like I say, more in a bit. But my partner is a classic entrepreneur. So he saw a business opportunity because he would see the supplement companies keep placing orders for boxes for their supplements. And he's like, oh, these orders just keep coming in and they keep replacing, they get bigger and bigger for these supplement companies. So that's what sort of made the light bulb go off in his head, saying, hey, consumables, supplements, something that people take every day, there's something to that as a business. And that's what got him into researching the supplement industry, learning about maca, which no one really knew about. It was, like I say, the first one to import it, and then getting into that business. So he saw that opportunity there, a business opportunity. And then I think in me, he saw the opportunity, like as a good partner, to see the long game. Someone who can do Ironman. Like, I trained for Ironman for 10 years before I did one, right? So you have to have that long-term, long game mentality. And when Charles and I, one of our first conversations, it was really about that. It's like, look, if we do this, we're very realistic. Like, it may not work. Like, there's look back and say, oh yeah, I knew it was going to work. Didn't know it was going to work. And it was a gamble. And I had done seven years of professional racing, and I was kind of at the point where I was ready for something new. So it worked out well that way. But yeah, we started very lean, as I said. He just, he sold his truck. He pulled together a little bit of money that he had, and we had a very low burn rate. Like, it was just us, and we didn't pay ourselves, and it was very lean. We just kept it lean, and we raised money at year 7, which is unusual. A lot of people raise it earlier, and I mean nowadays, like, it's almost like a sport. Like, raising money has become itself the objective, which a case can be made for that if it's a good time to raise money and it's frothy, the market is frothy, as they say, and you can raise a bunch of money, have a war chest, maybe that's the thing to do. But the way we did it was just very lean. And then our first investor and our only investor was VMG. They have an office in Los Angeles, but their head office is San Francisco, and they're amazing. So, and then they took us, they said a 3 to 5 year plan through to an acquisition. So they architected that whole thing. They're great. Like, they're so good. And then 4 years in, based on working with them and kind of preparing the company to go that direction, it was 4 years once that happened.
It is. We could have a whole discussion, I think, and I would enjoy it on sort of redeploying your talents, because so many people think, I'm good in this, a lot of athletes especially. Will I ever be good in something else? And a lot of the methods and the practice and sort of the mindset that you honed as a distance runner and triathlete, you really did sort of deploy it: patience, persistence, not scoring yourself day to day, the pain. So it is interesting to see those lessons, and I'm not just trying to use sports metaphors, they're actually real in business. If it doesn't hurt, it's not working, I guess.
Yeah.
So in 2000, was it 2012 that the company was acquired? No, 15,
Yeah,
sorry.
15,
right? 15.
yeah.
Okay, so 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And how did your life change, if at all?
Really not a lot, to be honest. It was, yeah, it was, when you have something that you've worked on for so long, 11 years, and now someone else has control over it, I felt good about it because it's an evolution, and I really enjoy the building and kind of the sweet spot. I think my favorite time, if I had to look back, was maybe year 3 to 5, somewhere in there. Like, it's working. You've got to the point where you're over that hump, like you've got some traction, but you can still move fast. You don't have these people who you have to run everything by. You don't have, anyone to, like, you don't have a board, of course, and you can still make decisions and get stuff done quickly, and you can still be creative. So that's what I really like. And so my partner, Charles, too, like once we sold the company, he started a fund called Lyra Growth Partners, based in Vancouver. He still lives there. And so it's just that. It's investing in companies that are in that range that we just really love, so that we can continue to work with entrepreneurs and try and, help them get to an exit in less time than we did. Maybe 3 to 4 years as opposed to 11. It's a long time. We made mistakes, as any new entrepreneurs do, and we've learned from them. So why just reapply your learnings once? Why not help others reach their goals as well from what you've learned? Otherwise, it seems like kind of a waste.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here, yeah. It's this collective. And I would like the same from other people, too. If I get into something new that I've never done and they've had some success in, I'd love to learn from them. So why, just being collective with it, too, and not have, like, if we can learn from other people's mistakes and not our own, then I think we're much farther ahead.
Excellent. I think at the time that the transaction closed in 2015, it was the largest transaction of a company in British Columbia, wasn't it? Or up there.
A food company, yeah. I think there was a mining one or something.
Oh, mining, yeah, that doesn't count. They get the exception.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to leave it to you guys if you want to ask more questions about the company in a few minutes when we open up to questions, but I want to dive into food and the plant-based movement. I don't know about you guys, but the single largest source of stress in my life is food. How to eat healthy, I do that. Where to find healthy food on the go, especially if you don't cook. And you all know this is the key to living a long, healthy life. But if the options aren't great, you're sort of stuck. In your TEDx talk, you outlined Thrive nutrition principles. I don't know if those have evolved since then, but can you touch on those a little bit? Because I don't know if anyone in here is a nutritionist, but some of these things are a little bit intuitive and some of them are counterintuitive. And so I assume all this stuff is backed by science.
Yeah.
That you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We can Google you, of course. So can you talk about the 3 principles that sort of were outlined in your talk?
Yeah, some of them, and this was through, I guess, like anything is created, you have to have a problem you're trying to overcome to need to try and find a new way to do it. So I found that there was a lot of misunderstanding around nutrition, and there could be a lot of benefit if that were figured out. So one of the principles that I wrote about in my first book called Thrive is high net gain nutrition. So what I mean by high net gain is choosing to eat foods that take less digestive energy but return more nutrients. So when I say nutrients, I mean things like vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, not calories. Calories, we get enough calories. It's not about that. So again, coming back to a training principle that if you don't get a return on it, why are you spending energy, expending calories to do exercise if you don't get that fitness boost that will get you to the finish line in less time? And then also, if you spend, say, 1,000 calories in the pool, could you be more efficient with spending that same number of calories in cycling or running or in the gym? What's going to be the best spend for the return you're looking for? So I was going into the food industry looking at it the same way. So you want food, obviously, to digest very easily, because a lot of energy is spent on digestion. That's why countries that have the biggest meals In the middle of the day, they have siestas. Eating a big, heavy meal is tiring. All this blood has to go to your stomach. You have to digest the food. It takes a lot of work. It takes energy. You get tired. So I started eating foods that were better along those lines. So for example, I used to eat a lot of pasta and more refined carbohydrates that actually are quite hard to digest. And I made that switch over to things like amaranth, quinoa, buckwheat, wild rice, that technically they're seeds. They're not actually grains. So because they're seeds, you can sprout them. And when you sprout them, they become much easier to digest. They become germinated. And because of that, you spend less energy. And you get more nutrients in. So like I say, vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, all that, they're richer in those seeds as opposed to grains. So that's just kind of an overarching principle, high net gain nutrition that I found. If I started building my nutrition plan that way, it really had a big benefit. And I don't do this consciously now. This is sort of, it's just second nature, but you just start eating a certain way and you notice you just feel better. Another one was hormonal health, and that's what started the whole thing for me with Vega, is hearing Charles on the radio talk about adrenal function. And he described my symptoms, like I talked about before, not sleeping well, craving caffeine and sugar, gaining weight even though you're exercising, right? I mean, if you're doing that, if a lot of people, if you're gaining weight, people will say to you, you just have to exercise more. It's calories in, calories out. It's actually not the case. You are, as most North Americans, very likely at some point hormonally injured. And that term with me really stuck. It was used by an endocrinologist when I went in search of my own problem, where I found that it didn't matter how much I exercised. I was training 35 to 40 hours a week, yet I was gaining weight, and it was fat. It wasn't a huge amount, but I was gaining a little bit of fat. And I thought, how is this possible? And people just said, exercise more, eat less, and it's not the case. And the reason that's not the case is because what happens? Stress, and I write about this extensively in my first book, stress can be put into a few different categories. And stress, by the way, any type of stress, whether it's biological, emotional, nutritional, the result is all the same. And cortisol, the stress hormone, goes up whenever you get stressed. And when that happens, all those bad signs of cortisol that I talked about before kick in. So I was overtraining. I just was exercising more than my body could rebuild and repair itself. And that's what caused my cortisol levels to go up. So I need to cut back on the amount of training. But what I could have also done is actually really tightened up my diet. It really cleaned it up. And when I say diet, I don't mean like diet eating less. I just mean eating higher nutrient-dense foods that have more nutrition, that take less digestive energy. That becomes less of a stress to the body when you're well-nourished. And then cortisol comes down. When cortisol comes down, then you start sleeping more deeply. You get in that deep phase of sleep called delta, which is really deep, rejuvenative. That's when your body rebuilds and repairs. You wake up after maybe 7 hours. You don't need 8 hours of sleep because you've slept efficiently. Quality goes up, quantity goes down. And it's one of those great things, right? You can get an extra hour of sleep a day just by really eating well. And then you can actually train more because your stress threshold has come down overall. We all have a stress threshold. So why not do what I call production stress as opposed to uncomplimentary? Uncomplimentary is eating low-quality food, or emotional stress, too, can be categorized as that. Worrying about things you don't have control over, what the weather is going to be like, things like that. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Don't call, bad traffic. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. It's not stress if you don't perceive it as stress. It's very much perception. So cortisol then comes down when you learn how to deal with things. You learn how to, put things in perspective. That means you can train more. You don't worry about what the weather is going to be like. You don't get stressed out in traffic. You can actually exercise more before your stress threshold spills over.
There's a couple things in there that I just want to make sure that so this isn't just for performance of being an elite athlete. This is performance in everything, test taking, you name it, whether you're training physically or mentally. So how many of you, these are in school, I dare to ask, who's eating a lot of fast food. But how many of you are really working, well, it's first week of class, so this is a tougher question, are burning it from in the middle of finals? You're burning it from both ends, you're not sleeping a lot, you've got demands at your sorority, fraternity, organizations, whether you've got a part-time job. How many people really, really press it while they're in school, working really hard? And how many, keep your hands up, and how many people get less than 7.5 hours of sleep a night? Put your hands up. And keep your hands up. And how many people know they're probably not eating some great food? Everybody, leave your hands up. Leave them all up. Everybody put your hands up. All right. You've just basically said, I want to live a suboptimal life and perform below my capabilities. You will get more from a net gain from sleeping well, probably, than you will get from studying an extra 2 hours overnight. It's just sort of the way the body works. So all these things we're talking about, especially food, it matters for everything you do, your concentration, your focus, your ability to perform. So I just don't want to go too deep without sort of reminding them that it's not just about food and running long distances. Okay, so cortisol, you want to bring that down from stress, not only from the food you eat, the weight, but also the mental techniques that we're going to try and cover in this class on how to understand what you control, locus of control, things that you can't control. If you stress over them, you're wasting your time. So some of those techniques. Okay, so sleep, stress, and then you have another point, and then obviously how hard your body has to work to digest. You eat a can of Pringles. I may have done that in my life. You know, the whole thing. There's zero nutritional value, so your body has to keep on working. You're not craving your hunger, or you're not satisfying your hunger, so your body's got to keep eating and digesting a food that's almost indigestible. So like you got to think about what you're putting in there.
And to that point really quickly too, is so common now for North Americans to be overfed yet undernourished, which seems like a paradox, and it would have been, you know, a long time ago, but now it's very common because food used to be synonymous with nutrition. The more you ate, the better nourished you became. So that's why our hunger signal stays active when we eat, you know, Pringles or anything that has, like white bread, for example, a lot of volume, not a lot of nutrition. So you can eat white bread all day long, your stomach will physically fill up, but chemically you're still hungry because your body has not got the nutrients it needs, which is, of course, that's a primal signal. It tells your body, go and find food, you need nutrition. And until you get that nutrition, like I say, the vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, that hunger signal is going to stay active. So you're going to keep wanting to eat food. You're going to keep craving until you eat those nutrient-dense foods, foods that have a lot of nutrition.
Are those green foods? Are those fruits and vegetables and
Yeah.
things that we normally associate as being from the earth?
It is, yeah, they are. And this is obviously easier said than done, but if you can pack in, just being aware of this stuff, just even thinking about it, that if you get more nutrient-dense foods, a lot of those green foods, you know, big salad, have a few big salads a week. It doesn't even have to be every day, but just pack in greens. Greens are really good. Even blend them up, make a smoothie. Blend in greens, blend in, you know, whether it's pea protein, rice protein, flax seeds, hemp, you know, there's all kinds of good things you can blend up and just get in your system. And you'll find too, you know, in the beginning, your palate probably won't like it. It probably won't taste good. But what happens, this is a great thing when this happens, your palate will start to change. You'll actually start to really appreciate the subtlety in basic foods. Like you'll be able to eat a potato, just a baked potato, and it will taste good. You'll eat different types of lettuce, and you'll taste different flavors and different types of lettuce, but only if your palate is recalibrated. And it takes a little bit of time, but once that happens, then you don't even want to eat the bad things. So everything you eat is good for you because that's what you want to eat. So you don't miss out on anything. Like this is not a deprivation thing. Like you should, and this is a whole other rabbit hole, but willpower can be depleted. And you don't want to have to, every time it's time to eat, you don't want to have to exercise willpower. It's not healthy. Because then when a real challenge comes in work and life, your willpower is going to be depleted. So you got to take the time to actually recalibrate, get your palate to change so that you're eating what you want to eat. It's just that what you want to eat is really good food. And so that's a great time, effort, investment in the beginning. The payoff is huge, and it stays with you your whole life. And then your willpower is stocked up. When big challenges come in business, school, life, whatever, you know, you're ready. You got that because you're not depleting it at every meal like so many people are. They get the nutritional benefit, but they don't get the other life holistic benefits of that. So just be aware of that too. That helped me a lot when I made that switch.
And before we'll open up for questions in a second, I want to talk about the myths of food. And people probably ask you if you're on this diet, how do you get your protein if you're not eating meat?
Yeah, that's number one question.
So how do you get your protein if you're not eating meat? And we're humans, we need an anthropologist here, I guess. Were humans designed to eat meat? our closest relatives are not eating meat.
No, so very good questions for sure. And so the protein one, yeah, someone who hasn't eaten animal products in a long time, if I have heard that question many times, but it's a very understandable question because we have been taught that meat and protein and dairy and all these things go together, and that we need these things to build muscle and even just to live. So it's not true. Of course, you can get complete protein just by plants, not even trying that hard. Greens, like you eat a big salad, percentage-wise, spinach and kale, it's 50% protein. Half of what you have in spinach by weight is protein. You eat algae, like you mix in some chlorella and spirulina and stuff, that's 70% protein. And it's getting easier and easier too, because Whole Foods, not the store, but just Whole Foods, they're complete. Like that's what makes them whole, is things have not been separated. Like a lot of refined foods, white bread, the wheat has been separated from other components in the wheat. So you're left with the starch. It doesn't have the fiber, it doesn't have the fat, it doesn't have the protein. And we want those. So if you have wheat, just as a very basic example, heirloom wheat that has not been refined, you get protein, fiber, and fat. You don't just get starch. So when we start eating a more whole diet and not these refined foods, we naturally just get more protein. If you are an athlete, you are training a lot, you may want to add some extra protein. And obviously, that's what gave birth to Vega, which at the time was called Vega Complete Whole Food Health Optimizer. Now it's called Vega 1, very, very simple. And that just makes it easier. And the sport protein too, a lot of people don't realize, but gram for gram, an endurance athlete actually needs more protein than a strength athlete, because you go for a long bike ride, long run, your body starts to burn fat as fuel, which is the whole point, to get your metabolism efficient and sparing glycogen, burning fat, so that you don't hit the wall, you don't become glycogen depleted partway through your run, called hitting the wall in marathoning. So that's part of the training, is teaching your body to burn fat efficiently. But part of the time when it burns fat, it's also burning a bit of protein, which then translates to muscle. So if you ever watch races like the Tour de France, long races, athletes start off perfect weight. By the end of it, they're pretty frail. They're pretty spent, because their body's actually been eating protein as a fuel source. So make sure you get enough protein if you're an endurance athlete right after. And that was just a mistake I made too. I just didn't pay enough attention to protein earlier on. I thought it was all carbs, but if you're not burning carbs, if you're doing those long, slow runs, the whole point is to not burn carbs, to burn fat, to teach your body to burn fat. You got to have enough protein in there. So ways you can do that, pea protein, rice protein, obviously Vega works for that too. But even just going to the grocery store, buying buckwheat and things like amaranth, quinoa, stuff I talked about. There's pasta now that are made completely from chickpeas or lentils, and it's amazing. Like,
do those still have nutritional value once they're sort of in that form?
They do, yeah. There's some that are just basically lentils or legumes just blend or just ground and made into pasta. If you get sick of eating those foods in their form, you can eat them in pasta form. So it's kind of a nice thing.
And can we go to your book to sort of look at the diet itself? You've sort of outlined it in that. So the last myth I want to touch briefly on, and maybe this generation already sort of like not only knows it, but like is avoiding it, but like dairy.
Yeah.
You're from a different generation. Like when I was growing up in my elementary school, they would have like posters on the wall from the United Dairy Association, the American, that you should drink 8 cups of whole milk a day. Like what person other than the lobbyists for the Dairy Association would ever recommend stuff like that? Like they've been forcing this down. I don't think there's any other species that goes and finds another mammal and says, I think we should drink the milk out of this 1,200-pound bovine for my baby.
No.
And I'm laughing because like it becomes obvious at some point, like that just has got to be tied to all these digestive issues that some of us have, and it just can't be right.
No, it's funny. It's so true too. Like it's such a generational thing. Yeah, and I think you guys
already sort of exclude dairy, most of you, or are you still consuming it?
Our generation is a lot more lactose intolerant nowadays.
Oh, you guys sort of got it out of the gates, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Your parents passed this one on to you.
Yeah. No, it's funny. It's like I heard someone actually. He was asked. He's like, So how, and it was a nutritionist, how can you tell if dairy is right or wrong for you? And he said, oh, it's very easy to tell if it's good or bad for you. What you do, just make a phone call. You phone your mom and pay very close attention to how your mom answers the phone. If she says moo, dairy is okay for you. If she says anything else, it's not. And that was just kind of his thing. It's like, look, if you're a baby cow, dairy's fine. If you're human, probably not. So
Exactly.
it's kind of like that. But.
We got some time for questions. Do we have a microphone?
Yeah. First, thank you for coming here today because I have been vegetarian for 3 years. And actually, Vega is the brand I have chosen from the very beginning. And I'm still taking it right now. I love the chocolate flavor. And I would say I got this journey from the beginning. It's not for animals, not for environment. I started it because I wanted losing weight. And I know a lot of people actually try to like becoming a vegetarian from that standpoint. I know a lot of people did that. But it's not great from the very beginning, and turns out it helps me a lot. But things turns bad when I started to do fashion blogging and the modeling stuff because I gradually established my purpose onto how like skinny I am, and so I developed a eating disorder last year. And throughout my recovery journey, I talked it very like publicly throughout my social media, and I know a lot of girls are actually having very similar symptoms of eating disorder, especially like craving for stuff, and they like try to restrain themselves from certain foods. So I would say it's a huge society trend right now that people are like overemphasizing the shape over the function. So for a person like as you personally who are like going like all the journey of emphasizing the function of body and know that nutrition is very a key point of that, what would be your suggestion to everyone, especially I would say girls who are like a lot of them are suffering from this idea that being skinny is the standard of beauty. And a lot of people right now in our society are suffering from the body dysmorphia because that's what the social media told us. That's beauty, that's the goal, that's the meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a whole big topic for sure. Like that's a big one, definitely. And I think too, keeping in mind that I've seen a bit of a shift, and I don't know, maybe it's just in my circles, but trying to be so skinny it seems to be less popular than it used to be. Just being healthy now and being fit and being toned or strong and functional is sort of seems to be, and maybe it's just sort of my bubble, but that seems to be gaining more popularity. So more of a focus on health, and when you're healthy too, you'll be closer to your ideal body weight, which is what we want, right? I mean, it's all about that. And yes, some people, they look in the mirror and they see themselves as, even though they may be very healthy, they may want to lose weight for whatever reason, like whether it's, they're trying to emulate someone else or it's the way they think they should be for whatever reason. But I can recommend a really good resource for that. It's a blog called The Full Helping, and it's this friend named Jenna who lives in New York, and she works with many people in that situation. She has a great blog and a great book too. But it used to be called Choosing Raw, but now it's called The Full Helping. So thefullhelping.com. Lots of great info there on that. You're welcome.
And if you've seen any endurance runners or really elite runners, they aren't the healthiest looking people in the world.
No, and that's a good point too. It's like I think like for certain, when I was my fittest, I didn't look as healthy. I was a lot lighter, and a friend too, a former roommate and still a really good friend who I remember it was the year 2000, and he was just about to go off to the Olympics, his first Olympics, and I hadn't seen him in a while. I was like, I looked at him, I thought, is he sick? Is he okay? Like he looks so gaunt. He just didn't look good. But health is not always tied to performance. He was very light. He was very efficient. He couldn't hold that body weight for a long time, but he nailed it perfectly with his race. He ended up winning. He won a gold medal, and he was completely like that. That's the art of that too, right? You're not going to look good for a while, and you're going to be very light, but just super efficient. But when I first started giving talks back in 2004, I'd just come off triathlon, and that was actually a criticism I got a lot. They're like, why should we take this guy's advice on health? He's so skinny. And I think it was also because I was wearing really baggy hemp clothing that I was given, but that's a whole different thing. But it was, it's that association to, yes, skinny and health. And I looked so skinny, but I was fitter then than I am now, so.
So, as someone like me who was born and raised in a low-income food desert community, a lot of the stress is external, whether it's economic, environmental, emotional, and obviously added to that is nutritional stress. And a lot of it is because there's a lack of knowledge and options. So how can you or your peers use your platform to shift the perception or at least the philosophy to cater to these type of communities?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, food deserts are a problem. I know there's more being done downtown Los Angeles. I know there are a few parking lots that have been turned into community gardens and so on, which I think is great. It doesn't have to be expensive either to eat well, and this is a conversation I have had often. And you know, when I started off, when I was racing full time, I certainly didn't have any extra money to spend on food, and I would go to a grocery store and I would go to the bulk section and get beans and get rice, you know, and it was very bland, but it was functional, and I ate well that way. And definitely, if you eat, if you go to Erewhon or some of the Whole Foods, I don't know if you know Erewhon. It's like Whole Foods but more expensive. Like really, but and you know we live in a bubble when you go to Whole Foods to save money. That's sort of bubble here, but it doesn't have to be. And like I say, I think as more and more awareness gets out there, there are groups doing this, and community gardens, like I say, is a big part of that. And we're lucky living in Southern California. You know, we can grow year round. And again, those bulk sections in supermarkets can be really good. And you know, you can go down you walk down some of these aisles and you see all these new amazing vegan foods. And I've got this a lot. People say, oh, I'd love to be vegan, I can't afford to. And that bothers me because, yeah, you can spend a lot of money in eating all these vegan snacks and these vegan treats and all these very expensive designer vegan foods, but you absolutely don't have to. And in fact, I think it's healthiest not to. I think it's healthiest to eat very simple and those basic foods that are not expensive. They do take some time, right? Because you have to soak the whatever it is and wait for it. But if you're prepared and put in a little time, a little thought, you can eat very well for not much money at all.
Hi, thank you for coming in. You were talking earlier about justified confidence, sort of that ability to put in the work, to believe in yourself without needing anybody else to tell you. So with that being said, do you believe with like the right amount of work, anybody in here could achieve anything, they put their mind to, or really, reach any sort of goal, or is there a limitation when it comes to physically, mentally, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question. And I think I'm a very realistic person, and I think that has helped me a lot. Not anything's possible, and not all of us. We all have separate talents and abilities, and I think learning ourselves and knowing ourselves, knowing what we're good at, knowing what we're not good at, knowing what we want our life to look like, and what we are willing to work on, what we're not willing to work on, what we may get bored with or just lose interest in, and what we really want to focus on. What gets us excited? What makes us get out of bed in the morning with excitement? I think if you get out of bed in the morning and you're excited to really jump into something, and you know yourself well enough that you're going to keep doing this, 1, 2, 3 years, a decade down the road, then I think a lot is possible for sure. But I think really learning yourself, and some people, and this conversation before the class actually, like not everyone is is meant to be an entrepreneur, and that's fine. Like, it's a certain type of person. And I have good friends who are not entrepreneurs, and they never should be. They really enjoy their 9 to 5. They enjoy forgetting about work when they leave work. You know, a luxury entrepreneurs don't have. Like, entrepreneurs, you leave work, you're still thinking about it. You're always thinking about it. And it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just kind of the way it is. And if that's your mindset, if that's the way you're wired, then that's great. But if you're not, if you like to put in your time, your 8 hours at work, and then go home and hang out and forget about it and have no stress with it and put it behind you, then that's fine too. You can live a great life doing that. It's just knowing you and knowing what gets you excited, and just being consistent and persistent as well. So like I said, no, I don't think anything is possible with that. And I think the reason I was able to even have a career as an athlete and run as well as I did was having a good sense of what my ability was and not shooting too far above that and destroying myself in training, whether it's injury or burnout. So that just that getting to know yourself and that grip on reality, I think, can account for a lot, for sure.
Well, he says getting to know yourself, and sort of another way of saying self-awareness, and figuring out, this is all sort of the purpose of life, and not just this class, is figuring out what you're good at, what you're strong at. When he says not everyone's an entrepreneur, it doesn't mean you can't be in an emerging company or in an entrepreneurial venture. Just maybe you may not be a founder. You can be a second, you can be a joiner, you can be a grower, you can be an acquirer. There are a lot of ways to get into business. A founder's stomach is different. And so, as Gary Vee would say, that a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to improve their weaknesses this much instead of like doubling in and going in on their strengths. So auditing yourself and figuring out who you are and self-orientation is a really big part about figuring out where that goes.
Yeah, I just to touch on that, I really agree with that a lot. And I think that, we're taught to work on our weaknesses a lot, which, sure, work on your weaknesses, but just be very aware of what you're good at, what you're not good at. And there's that old saying in triathlon, train your weakness, race your strength. So always focus on, if you can spend, and again, it comes back to efficiency. If you spend this much time on a weakness and you spend that much time on what you're good at, and you can get this much farther down the road from focusing on your strength and really playing to your strengths, do that. Find a partner who can round you out. A good business partner is going to round that out too. So synergies in partnerships are very important too, and finding those. I mean, no one's a complete person. And just knowing, and again, coming back to knowing yourself. So definitely agree with that.
Hi. I think when people talk about having like a healthy diet, it's like pretty easy to do from like 9 a.m. until like 7 p.m. to eat healthy and have a salad for lunch and have like lean proteins for dinner and stuff like that. But after, like at a certain time, like when it comes to like drinking and like eating junk food late, like that's pretty difficult for a lot of people. And it's especially because people always talk about like what you're eating and not necessarily like, what you're drinking when it comes to health. Are there any tips or like different things that you do to like be able to like indulge in certain things that aren't necessarily super healthy, but also like, especially in a college environment, like pretty hard to avoid?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good question. And
diplomatically asked question.
Everyone had that question.
well, okay, so one part, if you're eating well throughout the day, I think your cortisol will actually be lower and you will crave unhealthy things less. So that's good. You're setting yourself up for success. But interesting point. So my new business partner here, Mark, sitting right in the front. So we actually make healthy alcohol. That was. So we make it just down the road, Mission Junction. It's just fermented juice. You ferment juice, and fermentation process eats all the sugar. No sugar left, zero sugar. And the byproduct is alcohol. And a whole bunch of other things too, like their byproduct of fermentation other than alcohol is also some B vitamins and probiotics, which is good obviously for digestion and other things. So it's just very simple fermented juice called 101 Cider, so 101cider.com. And then we started a new brand called Pulp Culture, which just came out. So it's basically the same base, full spectrum alcohol, zero sugar with probiotics, but added adaptogens, so botanical adaptogens like reishi, lion's mane, things that are good for you. So it's actually healthy alcohol. And you don't have a hangover from it either. Like, you actually really don't. We'll get you the info.
Can we get samples?
Yeah, so our address, you can come and visit us. We're going to open soon. We're not actually open to the public, but if anyone wants to come by, you can come and hang out, and we'll teach you all about it. 1700 Nod Street, downtown Los Angeles. But really, like, you're welcome to come in. Mark is such a wealth of
Interns,
knowledge.
projects, whatever you guys need.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested, this is how things work.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people have gotten life and career changing jobs and opportunities from speakers' companies. Shyness is not rewarded in the world. That's another thing that, like, you'll learn. So on that note, come up and meet Brendan if you want, but let's thank Brendan for coming. Thank you very much.